Okay, so for today's video I'm going to be getting this Suzuki TS200R running. This is a project road trail I've been working on for a while now. I essentially bought it and disassembled it completely into crates, and I'm now rebuilding it into something that I hope will be safe and reliable to ride. So today I'm going to be working on the little things necessary to make the engine run reliably. Right, so first up, one of the little things, just installing the air filter washer. Right, so now that I have the airbox lid off, you can see how I plastic welded up the speed hole that the previous owner cut in. As you can see, no hole, but you can tell where there was one. Replace the cheapo cap heads with some nice Japanese hex heads. These are the correct lengths too, so the fairing's able to sit up against the tank. Here's the oil reservoir and related hardware. I'm reinstalling this because I think this bike needs the oil injection to run correctly. There is a port in the front of the cylinder which I think might be feeding the power valve, so I'm going to run it with the oil mixing just to be safe. Right, so it looks like I've got to pull quite a bit of the bike apart to install the oil reservoir, including the airbox. That's okay though, because it gives me a chance to replace the bolts for new ones. Right, I was able to get the oil reservoir in just by loosening off the exhaust and shoving it underneath. Well, that's everything installed now. Tried to route the wires the best way I could. Heat shield and exhaust is installed. I don't know if the tank wasn't formed correctly or if the frame's bent, but getting the boot for the airbox to mount on both the carby and the airbox correctly was a real pain. Righto, so now I just need to replace the mechanical seal in the water pump. Right, so that's the casing removed as well. I did my best not to gold the aluminium around the edge, but it wasn't really much I could do. It doesn't matter though, because the seal does actually seal on the inner diameter of the bore and not the face of the surface, so it should be good to go. So I'm going to install the new seal similar to the way you would a bearing in a hub. Find a socket that is the same diameter as the outer lip, the outer rim of the seal, and then just hap on that socket, just so you're putting the seal in evenly and you're not bending anything. Right, so as you can see, the new seal is installed flush to the surface. So what I'm going to do now is just put a little bit of grease just on the part of the seal that is pressed up against the impeller. I was told that you should probably use the white water-based grease, but I can't think of anything bad that would happen if you did just use standard wheel bearing grease or something like that. I don't think it should interfere with anything in the cooling system. If anyone has any objections, I'd love to hear it. Right, so I'm just going to put the tiniest smear on the sealing surface, just because I don't want the seal running dry for the first few minutes before the coolant can get in and lubricate things. Now, I'm not saying this is a how-to channel, but if you are going to do this, you need to make sure you clamp the multi-grips on the base part of the impeller and not the fins, obviously. That way you're not going to be snapping anything off, you're just clamping the impeller itself. Right, so now what I need to do is check to see if the oil injection ports in both the carby and the cylinder are clear. To start, I'm just going to put straight water in the radiators just to flush them, drain that out, and then I'll put proper coolant in. This is aligned to the port on the front of the cylinder where the oil injector pumps oil. I can pull a vacuum on it and I can't blow into it, so obviously there's either an obstruction in the tube itself, which I doubt, or because the previous owner soldered up the ports on this, I did my best to unsolder them with a solder vacuum gun and soldering iron, but I must have missed a bit. I checked the carby and the air compressor can blow through the port alright, so I think that's fine. Right, so what I'm going to do is just use a big old soldering iron and one of these, heat it up. So put that on the end like that, seals pretty well. Hopefully I can get all of the solder out of the system. There's a good chance that it's flowed right down into the cylinder, it wouldn't surprise me, but I guess we'll find out. I'm going to put a bit of solder onto the end of the iron just so the heat transfer works a bit better. And yes, you probably should wear safety glasses when doing this because the solder can spit. Try not to melt anything else while I'm doing this. Still blocked. I'll come back once it's unblocked. Okay, so I was able to pull out the brass fitting and also clean things up a bit. It looked like it was just some kind of resin injected into it. As soon as I heated it up and blew through it, everything was fine. Whoever soldered it up thought that solder wasn't enough. So now hopefully I've got that clear in the cylinder itself. It looks to be clear. I can't see all the way in. We'll be able to test that once I put the fitting back on. Okay, so the fitting's only a press fit. So I'm just going to get some retaining compound, same as what you'd use for a bearing. Give it a bit of a coating and I guess push it back in. Well, the fitting's stuck back in with its retaining compound. Good news is I can now just blow through the pipe and there's no obstruction between the pipe and the cylinder. So now I've just got to reattach this pipe and we should be good to go. Okay, so I'm just going to put a little bit of oil into the oil tank on the bike, just because I haven't tested for any leaks yet. So now I just got to watch for drips. The only place I suspect it'll leak is on the main supply line to the pump. I didn't have any clamps to fit the pipe at the moment, so it's just on there temporarily. Uh-oh. There's oil building up on the engine. The old bolt and tube trick. Okay, so I was able to stop the leak just by putting a different hose with a smaller inner diameter on. Nothing special. Yes, I am going to make something to cover this. This is the tachometer cable mounting location. I converted this bike to a digital gauge cluster, so I don't need the old tachometer cable anymore, so I'll probably come up with something made out of rubber on the lathe. So now that the leaks seem to be stopped, I'll put a little bit more oil in, put the exhaust back on, and put some water into the radiator system to see if there's any leaks in that. Okay, so first I'll be just putting some clean water into the radiator system. This is not town water, it doesn't have any chlorine or additives or anything like that. Gurgle, gurgle, gurgle. Oh, dripping. I see dripping. It does seem to be coming straight out of the bottom of the cover. Okay, so I fixed the leak that was happening just behind the drain plug. All I did was, there's actually a bit of a warp in the cover, which I just sanded out so the cover was faced a bit more evenly along the case. So what I'm going to do now is put some premix in the fuel tank, run the bike, and hopefully it should prime the oil injection itself. And then once I've checked that there's oil flow coming out of the pump and the lines are filled, I'll put it back to straight fuel in the fuel tank. Okay, so I've put a bit of water in the expansion tank. For starting the bike, I'm going to put the seat on it. It does need a new seat cover. I think it's a homemade job that's on it. Okay, so I've put some premix in the tank. I mix it around 30 to 1, a bit closer to 25. So initially it should start and run on reasonably smoky, but as soon as the automatic lubrication system kicks in, it's probably going to be ridiculous. I guess this is it, moment of truth.
Okay, so the camera ran out of storage last night, so I decided to just pack everything away and wait till the next day.
Okay, so I think the bike's flooded, so what I've done is I've drained the carby and I'm just going to try and let the bike run off what's in the crankcase, so I'll give it a shot now. Okay, so that ended up being a fairly long-winded process. Every time I tried to kickstart the bike, the engine would hit once and then it wouldn't continue running no matter what I did. So initially I thought it was a fuel problem being too rich, so the engine was flooding and fouling the plug every time I kicked the bike over. Except making any adjustment to any mixtures didn't do anything. I even drained the fuel out of the carby and tried to make the engine run off of what was in the crankcase, which is what I usually do with flooded two-strokes. The bike still had the same problem. So next I tried diagnosing problems with the spark, took the spark plug out and there was a reasonably weak spark, so I put in a known good spark plug and then the spark was much better. However, no matter what I did, it would just hit once when kickstarting and then it would just give up after that. So I tried wiring in the coil off of a different bike. This is a DR250 coil, but the measurements checked out to be very similar to what the book says are correct. Had good spark again, except it was doing the same thing every time. The engine would hit once and then just give up. So I thought, well, I'll just turn it over with the drill on the flywheel and see if I can get the engine to clear out, and also watch the spark while I was doing that, just in case it was an intermittent spark. Sure enough, put the drill on the flywheel and had the spark plug out, and every time I started the drill, the spark plug would spark once, but then it would just stay turned off. It wouldn't spark again. And this was consistent. Every time I stopped the drill and then started again, I would get one spark. So I thought, well, obviously the CDI is booting up and it is deciding that something's wrong and it is killing the spark. That's why you're getting one spark and no sparks following that. So what I ended up doing was, because that switch under there, which is the neutral position sensor, actually connects to ground when the bike's in neutral. So I jammed a bit of wire into the plug between ground and where the neutral sensor would plug in, span it over with the drill, and sure enough the spark plug was continuously sparking. Okay, so place your bets on how many kicks it's going to take to start. I think one, based on how rich the bike's been jetted. The bike will be smoking a fair bit because it's on premix and on the oil pump, so it's essentially running around 15 to 1 at the moment. The neutral position sensor's a bit dodgy. The check engine light's wired into the low oil warning, so I probably don't have enough oil in the reservoir. Not quite sure if the tacho is accurate at the moment. I won't know until it warms up and runs properly. I'm suspicious it may be reading double, but it may not be. Because at idle it looks like it's reading double, but when you rev it, it seems to be accurate. Low beam doesn't seem to be working, but I think that's just a loose wire because high beam does, and I know it used to work. The radiators have warmed up, so the thermostat's open. If you see any water anywhere, it's probably just because I had to top the radiators up before I started the bike. I did miss a bit. But because the radiators are warm, it is a good sign. That means the water pump is working. I don't see any leakage coming out of the drain hole at the bottom, so the mechanical seal should be working. Well, the little bit of fuel I put in it has run out. I've had a look in the oil reservoir. There's more than enough to last quite a long time, so I'm not sure why the low oil light's on. It's a pretty simple system. It's just a couple of contacts with a float. It's not a resistance reading, so there's nothing that should really go wrong. I'll dump out the water, and hopefully all the green comes with it, and then I'll put in some good green coolant. Alright, I've let things cool down a bit because I don't feel like getting scalded, so I'll see what colour the water comes out now. The bucket had a bit of dirt in the bottom, but that does look green to me. It looks brown to the camera, but... Well, the mixture is mixed, so I guess it's my turn to spill it everywhere. Oh, hang on. Probably would be a good idea to put the drain plug in first. Otherwise I'll be pouring for a while. Righto, attempt one. Oh, I've spilled some already. I'm still spilling it. There's only so much you can do when you don't have a clean funnel. Gurgle. Okay, that's the radiator topped off. Obviously I'll have to run it for a bit to make it actually use all the liquid, but I still have to fill up the expansion tank. If you see green drips everywhere after this, you know why. Well, I think there's evidence of what happened here, but I think I'll just own up and say the hose tore as I was putting it back on the bottle and I didn't know, so when I started filling it, it started unfilling onto the bike. That's okay, I'll just have to blame the apprentice. Oh wait, the expansion tank's filled now and everything's hunky-dory, except the cardboard. Okay, to test the flow of the oil injection pump, set up a little system on the intake side so I can measure how much oil is flowing into the pump and therefore into the engine. As you can see, there's a little 2.5mm syringe I've just taken the plunger out of, and that is plumbed straight into the intake of the oil pump. I have previously set the RPM to almost exactly 2000. To do that I use the original gauges, which are smashed at the back, that's why I'm not using them on the bike anymore. And I've clamped the cable leading to the oil injection pump from the twist throttle, such that the pump is running in full operation. So because I don't have the same size measuring device as what they use in the book, I did some calculations, and based on the statistics that they give you, this syringe should be empty or close to it in about 1 minute of runtime. We'll watch the syringe and the stopwatch together just to see how close we are. Okay, so I think it passed that test with flying colours, so I'm confident in the oil injection system now. I've also added this rubber here because I was sick of the way that the kickstand was hitting the frame on its way back. I also took the threaded end off of that crusty cable and put a bit of rubber in it, so now it clamps against where the tacho cable used to go, and it should be sealed from the environment now. Okay, so the last thing I need to do is make a jumper cable for the kickstand position sensor. This is what was preventing the bike from running before. Yes, the neutral position sensor is dodgy. With this bridge the way it is now, it shouldn't matter what the neutral light's doing, the bike should stay running. Okay, so a quick demonstration for how I make connections for things like wiring harnesses and jumpers, just like this one. Give the wire a quick strip, just enough for a good solder connection. Just like that. Tin both sides. Heating up the copper and then applying the solder, and applying more solder every time because the flux is in the solder. That's what cleans the wire and allows it to flow. So that's our wire done. Now something I like to do with these crimping connectors is I separate the metal from the sheath using 2 different pliers. Put the sheath over the wire into where it would normally go into the connector. Crimp the connector around the sheath of the wire. Try and be very brief with heating up the connector and then applying some solder so that the wire is securely soldered into the connector. Very briefly though, I don't want to melt the wire sheath. And putting the sheath back onto the connector, and then giving the sheath just a little bit of a crimp with some relatively blunt cutting parts of the pliers, just to stop it from slipping off when I go to plug in or unplug the connector. And that's all I do for a good connection. I don't like using the crimping gun because it's a bit of a gamble if you've crimped the wire properly and the sheath's gone where it's supposed to. Normally when I see wires that have been crimped with the connector, I just turn them and they don't connect to the sheath securely, so the copper gets twisted and then it eventually snaps. Both the sheath and the copper are taking the strain. There's a good soldered connection that's not going to be intermittent or anything like that. Right, so here's that little connection connected and tucked away. These wires are for the battery. I'm going to find out if I can have the light going and indicators going and everything on this bike without a battery, and if I can do that, I'm going to find a capacitor that I can just hook up here instead. Okay, so I think that'll do for today's video. I think we've successfully turned a leaky non-running bike into a running one, and also had to fix a couple of things along the way. In the next video I hope to be re-spoking the wheels and possibly doing some other things like painting foot pegs. After I've got everything ready, the bike should be ready for a ride and I'll take it for its first ride. and maybe even do a little review of it as well, because this bike is pretty unusual, at least I find. I've never seen one of them out on the road before. I have a feeling this bike's going to lean really well into the corners, be pretty easy to throw around as well, being a two-stroke. But that's just something we're going to have to look forward to when the time comes. If you'd like to see other videos similar to this one, I've got a few others on my channel working on different parts of the bike. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Hopefully I'll catch you in the next video.